Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. I'm glad you're here. Busy show for us. Mike Griffith stopping by. We'll preview the start of UGA practice, which happens later on this week. And after that, just a few short days left, and it's Georgia-Clemson in the 2021 season on the way. It really feels like we've made it. It feels like we're here, and that is a really good thing. Recruiting news. Georgia got a big commit yesterday. I mean, both literally and figuratively. In the person of Griffin Scroggs, we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what one Georgia commit has said about possibly even more to come in the days ahead. That's all really fun. It's going to be a great show. Glad you're here. DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Sometimes it's hard for me to imagine how busy these football coaches must feel this time of year. I mean, personally, I feel really busy just getting my kids back to school and, preparing for the start of the season here. But ultimately, when it comes to football, all I do is talk about it. The coaches actually live it. They're actually, creating all of this. And here before the start of practice coming up in just a few days, Georgia has also been incredibly active on the recruiting front the last 2 days as well, getting a commitment from Dylan Bell, the receiver from Texas, yesterday, or I should say 2 days ago. And today we start the show by talking about Georgia getting another commit yesterday, last night, in the person of Griffin Scroggs, an impressive-looking offensive lineman out of Grayson High School. I've said before that, listen, I'm greedy when it comes to recruiting. I want the very best players from around the country, but I do really like it when Georgia also goes into the state of Georgia and pulls out a big name. Scroggs from Grayson High School. That's a program that most of us who follow high school football know a good bit about. In fact, let me show you on the screen the announcement from Scroggs, letting you know that he's made his pledge to the University of Georgia. And there's something cool about when a guy commits to Georgia from a high school program that's very easy to follow, seeing his progress that's gotten him to this point, seeing what happens for him in his senior year. I think that has a chance to make guys like that an even bigger fan favorite once they arrive on campus because they're just easy to follow. Now, the next time Georgia goes out to whatever state and gets the best player from that state, we'll talk about the national reach of UGA and the brand that DawgNation has established, and we'll talk about all that then. But for now, we're talking about this, and as I've said before, all things being equal, I like keeping those dogs at home. Griffin Scroggs is an example of that. There's also another point I want to make here quickly just for a moment, that one of the phrases that you hear attached to Scroggs very frequently is the idea that he's a fast riser, that he's somebody that has really grown on Georgia's radar over the course of however long, certainly over the course of this summer and prior to that. Who knows how much this has been in development. I think sometimes we're left to wonder exactly what that means. I mean, somehow, some way, it seems to suggest he's gotten better as a player, but how can you and I measure that? For those of us who are watching these games on TV or high school football games from the stands, sometimes measuring that with an offensive lineman can be a little bit difficult to do. But I think sometimes these kinds of points are actually fairly simple, that it doesn't take a lot of astute analysis to describe what this is. I'm going to do something here that I don't typically do. I don't typically necessarily highlight other folks who kind of cover Georgia outside of our little, media entity here, DawgNation. But I thought Rusty Manziel, who some of you know, had a very interesting tweet. And I think on the subject of Griffin Scroggs being a fast riser, someone who goes from maybe being off of Georgia's radar to now being squarely on it to the point that he had an offer he could commit to and jumped at the chance of doing that. This side-by-side photo I'm about to show you, for those of you watching on video, I think is a perfect example of this. This is Rusty Manziel from Twitter of Griffin Scroggs. So what Rusty writes is that when he first met Scroggs in 2018, he was 6'1", 335 pounds. Now he's 6'5" and 300 pounds. Now I want you to just look at this. The young man on the left is pretty clearly a college prospect. He wouldn't be wearing, a camp T-shirt if he wasn't. But that's not necessarily an elite physique, right? And I think that even Griffin himself would say that he had, a little bit of growing to do when it comes to his physique. But look at the transformation there on the right side. Now, as I said, as has been commonly mentioned, Scroggs is a pretty tall dude, right? I mean, he's 6'4", 6'5", whatever else. to be in that kind of condition, clearly beef, clearly some muscle mass, clearly that kind of good shape, while also being 6'5", is just not an easy thing to do. We talk about this all the time. When it comes to like high school athletes getting in pretty good shape, whether it's like the professional wrestler physique that a guy like Branson Robinson has, or just a guy like Griffin Scroggs who's transformed his body just to gain more muscle mass, at the high school level, that's a really hard thing to do because a lot of this is based on nutrition. And when you get to a place like Georgia, you got a plate of food that's perfectly designed for you based on your specific bodily needs. They got scientists studying all this kind of stuff, and every single morsel of food on your plate has been planned for you to eat. But a high school kid, all he's eating is whatever his mom and daddy bought for him. The idea that you have that kind of fuel for your body when you're in high school is just not an easy thing to do. And listen, I've never been a huge gym rat or anything like that. Some of you have been, and you know this. To eat enough calories to put on big muscle mass is not an easy thing to do. You hear about people waking up in the middle of the night to eat enough calories, or putting butter in their coffee, or all kinds of weird stuff just to get enough calories to kind of transform their body the way they want to. Nutrition's a big part of it. So when you think about, Griffin Scroggs and, how are you a fast riser and how are you growing on the Georgia radar, I think those two pictures side by side shared by the reporter who covers UGA, I think is a pretty good example of that. That you go from a 2018 kid who's, certainly big and on college radars, but maybe not all that muscle mass in the right place, to all of a sudden here we are now, posing side by side with Kirby Smart, chest sticking out of the T-shirt and all the kind of stuff that you want to see a prospect at a place like Georgia doing. And I have kind of a working theory about this. I have really no idea if it's true or not, but I have a belief that if you were to look at 3-star players who go on to college success and kind of outperform their college success, their recruiting ranking once they get to college, I'm a big believer that a lot of those stories, the commonality they might share is bodily transformation. I think you'd see that with Jordan Davis, right? One of the reasons why Jordan Davis is so much better as a college player than his high school recruiting ranking would have suggested that he would be. Part of that's maybe Georgia's ability to identify him as a defensive lineman when some of the world maybe thought he was an offensive tackle or something along those lines. But I think you also see a little bit of body transformation there as well. He was a big, beefy guy, but putting that weight in the right place and giving him a chance to be as mobile as you need to be an SEC defensive lineman, that's kind of part of that. That some of what you see from the 3-star guys who really thrive at colleges, in some cases they just get taller, which occasionally happens for a high school kid. Some of the small guys get a chance to add a little muscle mass. They get a little beefier. And then for some of the big guys, they kind of transform that 300-plus pound frame and put that weight where it needs to be and kind of reshape it in a way that gives them a chance to be more of a factor on the football field. And I don't know. I'm not a sports science expert. I'm certainly not a strength and conditioning coach, but I'd say those two side-by-side photos from Scroggs, not to say that he wasn't a college prospect before, but in terms of why he's to a greater degree on the radar for schools like Georgia, you look at a body change like that, you get a little bit of an idea of why that might have taken place for a guy that obviously kind of has some of the other God-given stuff, big, long, tall frame and everything else. I think that's a pretty interesting thing. Now, in relationship to all of this, you've got the Dylan Bell news from the beginning of the week, the Griffin Scroggs news from yesterday. All of a sudden, Georgia's starting to add a lot of stuff here to this 2022 class. And Jalen Walker, who I think is just one of the more popular recruits in this class, had a tweet within the last day or so that has reminded me of some of the things that you've heard from Georgia classes in the past. Commonly, remember, like the 2017 class, Richard LeCount was always doing this kind of stuff. It kind of horrifies me to think that we've now all lived long enough that looking back on the 2017 class kind of rings like nostalgic, kind of like a blast from the past, but it was a while ago now. Most of those 2017 guys have moved on from the program. But the point is, the same way that class was so much fun, the ground floor of the Kirby Smart era, and Richard LeCount was always out there, we're not done yet, we're not done yet, we're not done yet. And every time a guy like that would say that, Georgia fans get so fired up. It seems like Jalen Walker is taking on that role a bit for the class of 2022. Let me show you the tweet here from Walker on the screen. Walker says, "So y'all think we are done?" And he laughs about it, and he says, "You haven't seen anything yet." And if you look at the picture, for those of you watching on video, he's got the keep chopping axe. Here's my rule in life. Anybody who's got an axe in their hand and seems happy about the idea of using it, I'm going to believe whatever that guy says. So the fact that Jalen Walker's that comfortable holding an axe and that eager to use that axe, that means that I'm going to take him at his word when he says this 2022 recruiting class for Georgia is also looking to keep chopping wood there as well. So here's the thing. I would say that the 2022 class is certainly far from done. Before we're done on today's show, by the way, maybe a little bit of a nugget about an elite prospect that Georgia might be back involved with again in a way that you may not would have thought maybe just a few days ago. So we'll give you more on that. There is clearly work left to be done for this 2022 class. But in just what we know right now, both in terms of the guys who've worked hard to get on Georgia's radar or in terms of the guys like Walker who've been commits, kind of for a while, I love the personality of this class. I love Branson Robinson. I love Malachi Starks. I love Jalen Walker. I love the personality of this class. The guys who just seem really eager to be here, really excited to bring guys in the fold with them. And I'm like you. I mean, the summer to a degree hasn't gone quite the way I probably thought it would for Georgia's 2022 class. I'm not going to fully deny all of that, there is still some big, heavy lifting yet to be done. But I can simultaneously look forward to seeing that accomplished while I'll also appreciate what has been done. Georgia has brought some very interesting names in this class. I love the way in which they tout the idea that there's more still to come for this group, and it's going to play out during the season. It's going to play out as we head towards December, and if the recent past has taught us anything, it's all going to work out with Georgia signing another elite recruiting class. Guys like Scroggs and Bell this week are the next step in that direction. And Jalen Walker, let's take him seriously when he says, keep your eyes glued for more big news in the days to come, and I take that very seriously. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Also, brand new venture that it seems to be going really well, watching the show live on DawgNation.com each and every day. That's a really fun thing to be able to do. So much work going on behind the scenes to have made that possible. It's great to be able to share the show with you that way each and every day. Of course, if you listen podcast-wise, that's good stuff. Glad to have you. Apple, Spotify, everything else. Radio with our friends on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref every afternoon at 12 p.m. Love being able to do that. Just however you get to us, glad to have you with us here. And, of course, Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, the one that makes it all possible. And, there is still time to get in that summer getaway before the season gets here. You got a few great weekends left to take advantage of what is a beautiful time of year in the mountains of western North Carolina, and nestled right in there in those wonderful peaks is the Harrah's Cherokee Rosino's. Let me try that one more time. Sometimes words can be very hard. Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort properties, whether it be the original Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort or Harrah's Cherokee Valley River, whichever one you're talking about going to, you're talking about a 2-hour drive from where I'm sitting right here in the Atlanta area, a chance to take advantage of a luxurious spa, great entertainment options, of course, casino gaming, real table games right there at the Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort properties. The sports book is now open, gourmet restaurants, all kinds of stuff. So place your sports wagers, get your table games in, enjoy yourself a good time with the spa and the restaurants and everything else. Just make sure you check all of that out. Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort or Harrah's Cherokee Valley River. Website to learn more, Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. And it's great to have Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort presenting DawgNation Daily to you here today. We've got Mike Griffith coming up in a moment. We'll talk to Mike about the start of Georgia practice. That begins later on this week, and that's going to be a very big deal as you start to get closer and closer to Georgia Clemson on September the 4th. Before we get there, though, I do want to go around the doghouse here today. And I was thinking about something the other day. If you want to go back to, say, the early 2000s, way before I had any kind of media platform whatsoever. Certainly there was no such really thing as podcasts back then. I wasn't doing radio really yet, not really doing any kind of TV or anything like that. I was just, a sports fan who wanted to be in media. And so I was listening to sports media, watching sports media all the time. I'd drive around my car, I'd listen to the radio, and, if Georgia had a big game, and it's kind of funny, being a big Georgia fan, you'd think that I would love to hear people say good things about Georgia. But I always kind of find myself when someone was saying, this game's coming up for Georgia and it's going to be easy. Georgia's going to get an easy win. I always kind of felt like that actually kind of bothered me as a fan for some reason, because I guess I do, having grown up listening to Larry Munson, had grown up watching Vince Dooley as the coach of the Dogs, two figures who were notorious for their pessimism at times, for lack of a better phrase. I guess I was kind of cut from that same cloth as a Georgia fan. And so, when somebody would go on the radio and say, Georgia's going to beat whichever team, easy, it's going to be a cakewalk for Georgia, I always kind of felt like, well, the host that was saying that, or the personality that was saying that, they've got no skin in the game. They've got no idea what they're talking about. If they're wrong, it costs them nothing. They're just downplaying the significance of the game. In my mind, that as a fan of the team, I had certainly built up in a huge way and built up to be very important. And the reason why I was thinking about that is because I think that the current chatter and what we kind of think of as talking season, this time of summer before the practices begin, the season begins, this time of summer can be kind of the same way, where there's really nothing like media talking head, sports writer, national figure, whoever else. There's really nothing that those people can say that satisfies most Georgia fans. Because on the one hand, if one of those people, like say Pro Football Focus, which you talked about yesterday, if they talk bad about Georgia, well, a lot of Georgia fans don't like that. But on the flip side of things, if they talk too well about Georgia, well, that almost kind of feels like rat poison. And it kind of feels like, as I described before, someone with no skin in the game, hyping Georgia without any real risk if they end up being wrong, and almost toying with the emotions of Georgia fans who obviously have a lot invested in the upcoming season. So with that in mind, I was trying to think about what has been said about Georgia, what's the language that's out there right now, and what should matter as we head towards the upcoming year. And there was a piece this week at ESPN.com that I thought was interesting, kind of looking at the knowns and the unknowns for Georgia here this year. And obviously by now we have done so much of this. Hey, here's a proven commodity, here's an unproven commodity. Secondary, you're worried about that. Offensive line, you got your concerns there. Taking the next step offensively, whatever. And when you keep hearing this over and over again, you kind of still keep coming back to the same spot. That ultimately we don't really know what Georgia's going to be until they go out there and show it on the field. There's just no way of knowing ahead of time if this team is going to fulfill all the potential that exists for it. So with that in mind, let me give you a couple of phrases here from this story at ESPN.com. And the point that I'm trying to get to is this, is that given that we can't know outcomes of the games before they are played, if you are a Georgia fan and you want to justify feeling good about the upcoming season, phrases like the couple I'm about to give you, I think come as close to providing that as almost anything can. Bill Conlon was the writer at ESPN.com, and one of the things that he mentions about the Georgia offense is it has a, quote, ridiculously high ceiling. Now, I think that's great. Now that also is kind of a double-edged sword of, if it's got a ridiculously high ceiling, that doesn't mean it's achieved that yet. It just means it has the potential to achieve that. But if this was like Team X, not your favorite team, not Georgia, just some random team that's out there, and the consensus opinion was they, quote, had a ridiculously high ceiling on offense, that would be a team I'm thinking that you would be interested to see on Saturdays. That would be a team I'm thinking, if you're a gambler, you might think about betting on. If you were, the kind of person that likes making, playoff predictions, things like that, you might be paying a little closer attention to. That's a nice compliment for Georgia to receive ahead of the start of the season. Another thing that Bill Conley wrote in the recent piece there at ESPN.com was the idea that Georgia was, quote, all but guaranteed to have a front seven that will be elite. Once again, that doesn't speak to the fullness of the defense because secondary is still a concern. And, obviously nothing's a full guarantee, but Bill Conley says it's all but guaranteed that Georgia will have an elite front seven again. So think about this once again. So you've got, neutral observer, ESPN, far removed outside the bubble of DawgNation, pretty respected writer saying, hey, offense with a ridiculously high ceiling, front seven all but guaranteed to be elite, and now what do you do around that? What do you do to fulfill that potential? What do you do with all of that? And all things being equal, that's a kind of a nice thing to have said about your team. It doesn't satisfy those who really want all their doubts erased before game one. And it doesn't quite, rise to the level of being the kind of rat poison that some people think is unnecessary hype. It's just kind of a fair, objective piece of analysis about Georgia. That if you're a UGA fan, your team that you're getting ready to watch, the one that you hope to see against Clemson and every game after that, has got almost just as much of a chance to win this championship this season as almost anybody else could. And I got to tell you something. As Georgia gets ready to begin its practices later on this week, and before you know it, game one against Clemson and the other 11 that will follow after that, I got to tell you, that's a pretty good place to be at the beginning here of this season. That is Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Before we're done today, as promised, I told you that there is a really nice piece of information out there about maybe an elite recruit that's maybe considering Georgia more strongly than we would have thought maybe a few days ago. It also kind of harkens back to something we talked about on yesterday's show. So we'll talk about all of that before we're done. But for now, for the Dogs on the field, the practices that are about to begin, and what we'll learn from them once they start, let's get it all from Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Mike Griffith. Of course, he's going to be all over Georgia practices once they begin, hearing from players and trying to scoff up whatever rumor or just kind of collect together all whatever rumors kind of pop out there about who's doing what on that practice field. Should be certainly fun stuff. And, Mike, before we kind of get more into that, I don't know how much of what you got to hear of what I was just saying, but you kind of get the point that I'm coming from here, that if you're a Georgia fan, there's some Georgia fans who want every doubt erased before the season begins of who's going to start with the offensive line and how the secondary is going to gel and how all that's going to go. And there's some Georgia fans who kind of don't want to hear anything good about their team at all because it feels like the kind of rat poison that's just too much hype all the way around. But one way or another, when you look at what is the fairly common analysis of UGA, it certainly seems like the Dogs start this summer series of practices in a pretty good spot. There's not a very long list of true national championship contenders. Georgia is certainly on that. That comes with no guarantees, but it certainly makes Georgia the envy of most of the rest of college football, does it not?
I think it does, and I'm working on a story now that I'm going to post a little bit, Brandon. It's along those lines, and I get it. You're never going to make all the fans happy, and there's really two ways to look at it. There's those people that only want to hear the good things. They don't want to hear the bad things. If you say bad things, then, they want to know where you're born and, what color underwear you're wearing. And then there's the people that don't want to hear the good things because they say that sunshine pumping and rat poison. They only want to hear the bad things. So we tell you the good things and the bad things. That's what we do. It's and every team has good things and bad things. You can make a case, probably for 8 to 10 teams as national championship contenders, but then you can take those same 8 to 10 teams and come up with reasons why they won't win. So, the reality of it is nothing's perfect. And to your point, Georgia has recruited well. The roster management, I think, is excellent. I think what Georgia and Kirby have done in the transfer portal has been nothing short of amazing. I mean, Eli Wolf and Keira came along, plugged those gaps, and now we see Tyke Smith and last year's acquisition of J.T. Daniels was phenomenal. So I think Georgia is well positioned.
Let me ask you this. What are you most interested in learning about when practices begin, speaking to players here coming up pretty soon, presumably Kirby Smart, getting a chance to speak to him shortly after that, what you hear in terms of whispers? What do you want to know first, I guess, in terms of how these early practices are going to play out?
Oh, wow. Well, the health of players is always interesting to me. Dominic Blaylock was still not cleared when we were at the SEC Media Days. Keira Jackson was coming off of a knee surgery procedure. I thought that was the biggest news for Media Day was that Keira's had knee surgery, albeit arthroscopic, but that's a very important player. Keira Jackson lining up in the slot, that's a guy JT can throw passes to in the dark. You talk about a security valve and a team leader, a tough guy that represents a lot on the field. Nakobe Dean, his health coming off the labrum, that's probably even bigger. Kirby says everything's on schedule, but so the first thing I'm going to want to know is who's out there, where are they at? We think Marcus Rosemy-Jacksain is cleared. I think we feel really good about that. Is Dominic Blaylock going to be ready? Is Nakobe Dean 100%? Those to me are the primary questions.
Yeah, on the receiver front, I will tell you this, as someone who obviously cheers for this team, wants it to win games, I have upgraded my expectations recently for Marcus Rosemy-Jacksain. When he suffered that injury at Florida last year, I didn't know. That was tough. That was ugly to watch, hard to see, and it seems like, based on the videos that leak out, his recovery is really going pretty well. So I've probably upgraded my expectations for what I think he can do this year, but admittedly, I have probably downgraded my expectations for what Dominic Blaylock is going to be able to do, and I hate that because I think that Dom is a really good player when he's healthy. But that dog is just not barking right now in terms of hearing that he's, back and ready to go. I think eventually he will be, and there's a lot more good moments in a uniform for Blaylock to come. But, boy, you're just not hearing a lot of good news on that, at least of right now, for Blaylock. That doesn't mean it can't change quickly. Maybe it will. But, man, that's been pretty quiet this summer, hasn't it?
Yeah, he's running in a straight line. That's an August injury, and I'll tell you, I understand that fans want guys out there. I do. But it's the thing I hate the most is, oh, hey, where's George? How's George Pickett? I just want to say, hey, pretend that was your kid. Calm down. I don't know if George is ever going to play another game at Georgia. He wants to, but the injury occurred in March, at the end of March at that. Is it realistic to ask George Pickens to be out there in less than 9 months from a torn ACL? Maybe not, but to me, fans cheering on injuries that's kind of like there's nothing you can do, man. Don't even, it's like they'll play when they can play. It's not a matter of them trying harder. It's not a matter of George getting a better medical staff or some of the idiots. Oh well, the strength and conditioning staff. No, it's not that. It's football, and injuries happen, and as rules change, guys get hit in different parts of their bodies. And stuff happens. We're seeing a lot of torn labrums now. We still see ACLs. Georgia prepares as well, as safe as any team out there. And, there's just not much you can do. And so while it's important to know about injuries, there's just from a rooting on or encouragement, there's things that go beyond the player's effort or the doctor's skill level. There's an element of faith and just medical science behind it that we really can't cover. So Marcus Rosemy-Jack saying is going to be a go. To your point, Dominic, during July at least was still running in the straight line. They're going to be cautious. It appears that he came back too soon the last time from the knee, and you don't want to do that again. You don't want to end up with two knee injuries.
On the offensive line, here's the thing that I've said, Mike. I am very curious what Kirby Smart says, because I think there's kind of a growing sense, at least it's my sense, and I'm starting to get the sense that some of the people who watch and listen to my show agree with me on this. That Clemson defensive line, man, that's a load. Miles Murphy's hard to block. They have a lot of talent coming off that edge. I sort of want Jamari Salyer starting at tackle for that game against Clemson. And with all due respect to guys like Amaris Mims and Broderick Jones and Xavier Truss, who I still think can be a good player, I got a lot of respect for the talent that's at that tackle position. But I just think that you got to be careful against Clemson. I'm kind of rooting it for it to be Salyer that does start there. And I'm curious to hear the language that Smart uses. If early in the process they acknowledge that, at least at the beginning of the season, that Salyer is still a tackle for them, or if they treat him like he's kind of more commonly thought of, a very versatile player who's probably, suited for the inside game, the guard position at the NFL. The language that Smart uses to discuss the offensive line when he gives his first press conference, that to me is going to be really interesting, because I do think that it could go a little ways towards determining maybe what that 5 does look like against Clemson, knowing that that's a real Clemson strength that you've got to try to negate.
Yeah, well, before we get too carried away on Jamari Salyer, let's remember that JT got pretty beat up by Mississippi State and Missouri, and he wasn't exactly a Hall of Fame left tackle. If he was, he'd stay there, and they wouldn't have moved Xavier Truss there. So, I like Jamari a lot. I think he's a future NFL offensive guard. There's a reason he's not. There was a reason that they're moving him inside. So now the one thing we do know is he's played a lot of games there. But to my point, JT Daniels got hit a lot in the last 4 games of the season. Now some of that was on JT. JT held the ball. He had to realize that, hey, this ain't the Pac-12. That guy coming off the edge is getting there a step faster. And, if you see that pressure coming, you're not going to be able to hold it and complete the curl. You're going to have to audible or adjust that route. And I think JT's learned that. I think the offense has adjusted. And so that's the first line of defense is your quarterback at the line of scrimmage, getting you in the right protection and getting rid of the ball quickly. So that's the first thing that you can do right and do better. It's like Jake Fromm used to say when I asked him at the Combine, well, what do you say to people that say you don't get out of trouble like Justin Fields can get out of trouble? He says, I get out of trouble before I get in trouble at the line of scrimmage, calling the right protections, making the right checks. So that's number one. Number two, they'll put the best guy there. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter what you think, I think, the fans think. Listen, these guys see him in practice every single day. They get to see who can block Adam Anderson and Nolan Smith, and who worked well against Azeez Ojulari. They didn't just throw Xavier Truss out there and go, I wonder what he can do. No, he'd been tested. Now doing it in a game is different. Cincinnati had a good plan. Cincinnati was a good team. That's where the rival fan bases that want to look at that game with crossed eyes. They don't understand. Cincinnati was a good football team. Cincinnati would have beaten Notre Dame last year, no doubt in my mind. That was a good team that was playing for a piece of history. Now, back to your point, I don't know how far along Xavier Truss has come since the Cincinnati game. I don't know how far along a true freshman like Amarius Mims has gotten. And all the talk about Broderick Jones being the next Andrew Thomas is out the window for me, because I ain't heard or seen it. It's year 2. This is why you got to be careful with those recruiting rankings. They don't always work out. Now, maybe this guy will make it, but he ain't making it as quickly or as strongly as Andrew Thomas did. So the one thing I would say is let's rest assured that Kirby Smart and Matt Luke, this ain't their first rodeo, will have the best 5 guys out there. And yes, Clemson will absolutely be the best defensive front Georgia plays all year.
So let me just say this in response to some of the evaluation there of Salyer. I mean, I think it'd be great in life if you could find an Andrew Thomas, but I think you also got to leave room in your mind for the idea of just having solid starters, right? I mean, it's like you want to be better than that if possible, but it's also nice just to have somebody who kind of just sort of gets the job done. And I would say that Salyer, on the whole, last year playing tackle, got the job done. Was he the best offensive tackle in the SEC? No, he was not. Was he the best in the country? Probably not. Was he better than most? I would say probably so. And I think I'd say the same thing about Warren McClendon there as well. McClendon, I think, has got a really high upside. As of last year, he was certainly the kind of guy who got his job done. You know that he did, because very few times during a game did you ever mention his name. He was just kind of over there doing what he's supposed to do. The Georgia offensive line, measured by sack rate and things like that, wasn't perfect a year ago. Not as good as it was certainly in, say, 2019, when against pass pressure they were actually really good. A little bit of a step down in that regard a year ago. But once again, I think there's more than just being is he Andrew Thomas or not? There's also this thing of, can you find guys who are solid starters who play kind of above the line in terms of the level of expectation you have for the position? And I feel pretty confident saying Salyer is at least that.
Yeah, I think he's solid, but I think 2019 and 2018 had a lot to do with Jake Fromm calling the protections at the line versus last year you had inexperienced quarterbacks back there that hadn't played in as many games that weren't as adept. I mean, I'll give you an example. When Stetson Bennett got injured against Florida, he'd called the wrong protection package. He should have never been hit. That hit was the result of improper protection. So it takes a lot for the quarterback to run the team properly. Things that we don't know, things that happen behind the scenes. There's a lot of things that are built into the Georgia offense. To enable these quarterbacks to avoid the hits, but they've got to call the right protections. They've got to get rid of the football. So that's number one. That has a lot to do with the sack numbers, is the quarterback himself. 2, to your point on Salyer, I don't know. I don't know what Xavier Truss would have done sooner or later. What I know is they're going to put the best 5 unit out there, and that's just not something that we can judge from the outside. We just don't have the knowledge. We don't see enough. It's one of those deals where you've got to take the coach's word for it. I didn't think the Georgia offensive line was adequate last year. When they needed to run the ball against Florida with the game on the line, they could not do it. They went 3 and out on 4 out of 5 series. The offensive line failed. They failed. They trailed Tennessee at halftime. They could have scored from the 1-yard line on Tennessee. So this was not an offensive line, in my opinion, that was great. Now, was it all Jamari Salyer? No, it wasn't Jamari Salyer. There were issues at the center position from the onset. I thought Trey Hill had a disappointing year. Good for him that he got drafted, but he certainly wasn't the best center in the league, as we were led to believe before the season. And then, Warren McClendon was a freshman All-American, but, he wasn't Isaiah Wilson. So there was a drop-off on talent on the offensive line. There was a drop-off in execution on the offensive line. There was a drop-off in the run game from DeAndre Swift to Zamir White as the primary carrier. These are areas where they need to get better across the board to win a national championship.
Last thing, I've said before that I think for a football team, you got to have 2 seemingly contradictory things going on at the same time. You got to have the stability that's created by good chemistry, but it's also nice to have some new blood to spice things up a little bit. And I think that potentially Georgia's got the perfect recipe for that, with Eric Gilbert and Darian Kendrick and Tyke Smith stepping into big roles and kind of just bringing some new energy with them to practice when it begins later on this week. That, listen, I think the guys who've been here create the culture for Georgia, and I think that the new guys who are stepping in enhance that culture potentially, and I'm curious to see how that all meshes together, and I'm sure you are as well.
Yes, I like the way you said that. I think the culture, number one, is really important. And, that's one positive with this team. There's a lot of leadership. Nakobe Dean, Kirby Smart saying that he'd never seen a guy that stayed that engaged. That means everything. When Coach Smart is saying that, Lewis Seen, Jordan Davis, JT Daniels, Demir White, Jamari Salyer, Keira Jackson, these are very strong leaders. And knock on wood, you didn't see any Georgia guys, having the issues, Oklahoma getting guys arrested and stuff, LSU off field. You don't see that at Georgia this year. Guys are holding one another accountable. That is a really good sign when a team is staying out of the headlines for the wrong reasons and holding one another accountable, so that when you do get new players, to your point, they fit into that culture, and as you said, add some juice to it. And then add some competition, by the way. You make Amir Speed sitting back there going, hey, welcome, Darian Kendrick.
Right.
You can have my starting job. No, he's not. There's competition there. Same with the star position. William Poole's been on the team forever. He wants more than a jersey to hang up in his room. You don't think he's going to bring a little bit extra fire?
Yep.
Latavius Brainy as well.
Yep.
Hey, played good in the Peach Bowl.
Yep.
You think Tyke Smith's just going to walk in and no, these guys are going to have to earn those jobs. Eric Gilbert, Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint was recruited to play that position. You saw what Adonai Mitchell did in the spring game. He ain't out there jogging around for his health. Eric Gilbert's going to have to earn those targets, spend that extra time in the film room. So anytime there's an influx of talent, and typically we look at the freshmen, right? And it was hard for freshmen because they may be talented, but how much of the offense did they know? Did they have that man strength to compete? Yeah, not really. But you start bringing in transfers to compete against other seasoned guys that have been in the Georgia program, and let's not underestimate them. Let's remember, Demetrius Robertson came in here, and I was just as guilty of it as anybody. I looked at his numbers at Cal and said, oh, well, let's just put him at the top of the depth chart. He's going to be a star. Listen, he couldn't even get on the field, man. He couldn't beat out the guys here. He was not in good enough shape to compete with these guys. And then even the next year, he struggled against the physicality. So it's not a given that the new guys are going to come in here and walk all over the SEC. By the same token, they will push and make the team better, as you said, Brandon.
I think it's all very, very true, Mike, and I just can't wait to watch it play out. I'm so excited about the start of the season. Can't wait to read your coverage of it at DawgNation.com, and, of course, talk to you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort again very soon as well. Mike, thanks so much for your time. We'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
Appreciate it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So let me just say one thing here really quick, and then we'll move on to our SEC Through. On the subject of, like, what we were talking about the offensive line a moment ago, I've told y'all before that I think to win a national championship, you got to have superstar players. You got to have, as we've measured it, half dozen first-round picks, half dozen, all first-team All-SEC type guys. You've got to have, like, measurable superstars, household names, the kind of people that kids know, that opposing fans know. You just got to have well-known names, big-time contributors to win a national championship. But it's important to note this, though. You can't have 22 of those guys. This is not fantasy football, right? This is an all-star team. That every championship is also going to have role players there as well. I'd love nothing more than for Georgia to have Isaiah Wilson and Andrew Thomas book in first-round talented offensive tackle. Now, whatever happened to Wilson once he got to the NFL, that's his business, but the fact of the matter is he played as a first-round talent at Georgia. That's why he got drafted where he did. You'd love to be able to replicate that with this year's team. But if that was what it were required to win a national championship, then nobody would ever win a national championship because you're not going to have, 22 first-round picks across the board on both offense and defense. That it's okay sometimes to have solid starters. It's okay. Now, if you want to say tackle is such a position of importance that you've got to have great guys there, that you can have okay guy at whatever position, but offensive tackles where you have to have a great player, I could maybe listen to that because obviously we'd certainly understand that tackle is important, although it sounds like in the NFL they're starting to kind of rethink some of that in relationship to its hierarchy in the offensive line. But the point is, if that's the argument you want to make, I could somewhat listen to you on that. But I just hope you hear me when I say this, that you got to identify your superstars. You better have a half dozen of them. You better have big-time, big names, Roquan Smith-type performances, what Alabama seemingly always has a lot of. You better have some of that. But nobody's got all of that. Nobody's superstars across the board. In some cases, it's just guy who does his job. with little fanfare, doesn't get noticed by the fans a lot, but just goes out there and makes his contribution. The 2017 team for Georgia had a good bit of that. There were guys that we were always falling all over ourselves to praise. There were some guys we barely noticed, but they brought their lunch pail to the stadium each and every Saturday, and they just went to work. And this team's got to have some of that kind of stuff, too, if it's going to achieve what it has the potential of possibly achieving. Before we do our SEC through, let me remind you about the Finnish long drink. Great time of year to be enjoying that. It's from Finland, which makes it kind of cool. And the story for how it got started back in the 1950s when the summer games were in Helsinki, it's actually kind of a cool backstory. The things that I drink, I kind of like knowing kind of where they came from and what it means, right? And the Finnish long drink has actually got a pretty cool, origin story, if you want to say it like that. It's worth reading. If you go to thelongdrink.com, you can, read about it, but also just enjoy it, because ultimately it's really about how it tastes. And this is a ready-to-drink cocktail right out of the can. It's like a citrus soda. There's like a gin kick to it. It's really cool, and it's not all just citrus. Like, you also have like the cranberry. You've got the long drink strong, the long drink zero. You got 4 different varieties to choose from, and it just kind of different things suit different people. I do like the original that comes in the blue can. It's kind of got the grapefruit flavor. The long drink strong, I like that there as well, because let's face it, every now and then that's kind of what you want. 8.5% alcohol by volume. That is good times all the way around. It's just worth trying. You got so many of the folks in our audience have tried it. They've enjoyed it. So check out thelongdrink.com to find out more. Thelongdrink.com, you can find out where you can pick some up. All right, so this is kind of interesting. So Big Cat Bryant, who formerly of Auburn, at one point in time a prospect on Georgia's radar in the class of, I think, 2017, am I remember that correctly? So Big Cat Bryant has left Auburn. He's transferred to UCF. UCF has started its practices. They had kind of a media day, and Big Cat Bryant was asked how this UCF team, now coached by Gus Malzahn, would fare in the SEC. And Big Cat said he thought they would beat certain teams in the SEC, and he mentioned his old school, Auburn, by name, which is really interesting. That'll generate a lot of headlines. I'm sure Auburn fans reacted to that in a very strong way. And I'll tell you what this reminds me of. I do think this is going to be a really hard year for Brian Harsin as the Auburn coach, because there is such an obvious comparison. Malzahn became the butt of jokes for a lot of Georgia fans because Georgia beat Gus every single year, and they really enjoyed doing so. But the honest truth is, it's actually fairly difficult to accomplish at Auburn what he did. He won the league as head coach there in 2013, won the West there at 2017, beat Alabama and Nick Saban 3 times. That is not an easy thing to do. That even though Malzahn was kind of a stale, tired coach by the time his career came to an end after last season, the fact of the matter is, living up to what he did for a guy like Brian Harsin, who has won games at Boise State, but, steps into a spot in the SEC where he's totally unfamiliar, it's actually not going to be that easy to do. And the fact that Malzahn is still coaching at UCF, my guess is he will have some success there, and, he will have especially through the transfer portal, the ability to attract players. That the comparison, Malzahn still active in coaching, Harsin at his old job at Auburn, the comparison for Harsin and Auburn may not be always a favorable. It kind of reminds me of the initial stages of the Kirby Smart era at Georgia. When Smart first took the job in 2016, Mark Richt immediately jumping over and taking the head position at Miami. That did not do Kirby Smart and Georgia any favors, because once again, Richt, he hadn't won a national championship at Georgia, but he'd won a lot of games, multiple SECs, been to some big bowl games, and that was going to be a lot for Kirby Smart to live up to when he first took the Georgia job. And that first year when Smart was kind of scuffling, as a lot of first-year coaches do, boy, there's all those comparisons with what Richt is doing at Miami, and there was all this invitation for media people to say, wow, is Georgia sure they have the right coach? They could still go out there and have Mark Richt. Now, ultimately, Smart put all that in the dust with the success that he's had since 2017. But in the early stages, a lot of you remember that. Richt being an active coach at Miami was a little bit of a tough comparison for Kirby Smart when he was losing to Vanderbilt and losing to Tennessee and some of the things that were going on there that year. Well, I'm not quite so sure that Brian Harsin's going to be as good as Kirby Smart was at putting that comparison in the rearview mirror. In fact, I'm fairly certain that he may suffer in that comparison from time to time. It would not surprise me if Malzahn wins some games there at UCF, including here this year. And it would not surprise me at some point in time we hear a little bit about some buyer's remorse coming from the Plains. A couple of other SEC stories to get to here for a moment. We have an SEC team that has now started practice. It is Tennessee. Their first game got moved up to a Thursday, which gives them a chance to move up their start of practice there as well. When you can start practices based on when you play your first game. So Tennessee gets a chance to start theirs a little early, and there will be a lot of attention on that Tennessee quarterback competition. I saw where Joe Milton, the Michigan transfer, met with the reporters here a little bit. A lot of folks know who he is. I think there's also some curiosity from Vol circles for a guy who's been on the team and was a former elite recruit, a holdover from the Jeremy Pruitt era who had a chance to go somewhere else. How does Harrison Bailey factor into all this? Ironically, Milton's not the only high-profile transfer the Vols have. Hendon Hooker, the former Virginia Tech quarterback, he's on hand there as well. So there will be a lot to be seen about this Tennessee quarterback situation. Vols practice is going on right now. So there'll be news seemingly coming out about on this daily as the Vols try to figure out who their quarterback is. One final thing for our SEC through, and I teased this a little earlier, and, Connor Riley and I talked about this yesterday, that if you look at high-profile flip that could still be out there for Georgia, the name that he and I both mentioned yesterday as a possibility on that, was a guy like Mikael Williams. We'll obviously keep our eye on that. But somebody else to kind of think about here a little bit is Christa Miller. Miller, who has recently put out a list of finalists, and this is worth paying attention to with Georgia still kind of in the mix here. We have the Christa Miller screen grab that we can show there for that. So Christa Miller says he's going to be committing at the Adidas All-American Bowl. And it comes down to, Georgia and USC or Ohio State. He gave Go Dogs there twice in his hashtag there. So in this case for Miller, coming down to those final choices, potentially thinking about the future there for that. Maybe Georgia kind of still staying involved in that Miller recruitment, having a chance to do that. Obviously, that's one of those big names we will continue to watch as Georgia is in the mix right there. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, I want to show you this on the screen for those of you watching on video for a moment. For some reason, I've always really liked this kind of stuff. The other day when Nick Saban was talking about how long he was going to continue to coach, one of the things that he said is that he had been a part of a team for every year since, 50 years, however long it's been, since he was a small child. He said he'd been basically a part of a team, and he said he wasn't quite sure if he wanted to ever give that up. And I certainly understand where Saban's coming from on that, because there is something special about being on a team and the kind of brotherhood that you share when you do, have that chance to be on a team together. And, this time of year, we see some of this kind of stuff from Georgia. A lot of the players will get together with their position coach, and they'll have a little, fun and fellowship together at that coach's house before the start of practices. Glenn Schumann shared some of that. I guess they had what they call their second annual Linebacker Olympics. You see the photos of the Georgia players, some good-looking young men there in terms of guys that clearly have been working hard over the course of this offseason to be in good shape. Nakobe Dean, who Mike Griffith talked about before, he's all smiles. You see Quay Walker there, Smile Mon in there. You see a lot of guys who are, really kind of ready to go for the upcoming year, and that's great to see. But I also like the idea, and frankly, I'm just a little envious of the way in which these guys get to share those moments together as teammates. Nothing more special than the bond that comes from being on a team. And here before the start of what is going to be a very hard grind for Georgia during practices, I think all of us are glad to know that the Georgia players and the coaches are sharing a little time for themselves to have some fun and enjoy each other before they start battling against each other once summer practices begin just a short time from now. So that's really good to be able to see. Hey, before we get ready to wrap up today, we love to do our Gatorade roll call. We show off our golden shoe winners. Sometimes it's not always related to Gator hating. Pretty good edit here from our buddy Mad Dog on social media. I'll share this. Obviously, we're still reacting to SEC expansion, Texas and Oklahoma coming into the league. What Mad Dog writes is that things are going to be a little different for Texas in the SEC. And you can go back to that, please. On the left side of the screen, you see the horns up steer with the horns pointing up from the Big 12. And on the other side, you see horns down in the SEC with those horns pointing down there. And, yeah, that could indeed be the outlook for what it looks like for Texas once they join the SEC. Very funny stuff, and Mad Dog will make him our golden shoe winner today. He's won a lot of them. By the way, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, how about a Gator Hater countdown? 87 days from right now. Dogs get some revenge against Florida. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Of course, R.S. Andrews, the one to turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. One of the reasons why we love R.S. Andrews. All right, let me go to Facebook first today because it did start on YouTube yesterday. and then we'll get some YouTubes after that, and we will jump out of here. Of course, shirt on today. A reminder of you, we have SEC Country Live coming up this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, on the SEC Country video channels, Facebook, YouTube. That's going to be a lot of fun. So all good stuff all the way around. Can't wait to see you there for that. Also, check out RS Andrews, rsandrews.com. They'll get your air conditioning tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can find them online, and they'll take good care of you today. With that said, let's pop over here. Let's say hello to the folks on Facebook. A few comments to come. Bill Sanders says, always a great day to be a Gator hater. To truly believe that around here. Matt Rugavina says, I don't know about you, but I'll be doing horns up anytime Texas plays Florida, just saying. And, yeah, that's probably still true for me there as well, although it is not a pleasant thought to consider rooting for Texas. But even Matt, who's entrenched in the Lone Star State, he says, even I'm going to be able to root on the Longhorns if they're playing Florida, and I guess that's probably true there as well. Randy Jackson says, hope we come ready for Clemson, but if we don't beat Bama, I don't know if I'll be able to handle it. And I get that restlessness, right? I understand that. Bama's no easier to beat this year than they've been in most years, but I certainly understand why there's some restlessness about Georgia fans getting that done. I get where that comes from. Let's see what else. Somebody said they wanted to ask me a question. I didn't see the question. Somebody said they were here to ask a question. I didn't see what it was. So if you want to ask that again, I'll try to get that answered for you to the best of my ability. Tennille Calvino says, I need some help with a mountain lion. Do you hunt? If I did hunt, I'm not sure I want to hunt something that's going to hunt me back. You know what I'm saying? Like a mountain lion, I feel like it does. Are you really having an issue with one of those? Because that's always my fear. It's the animals that are also hunting you while you're hunting them. So I guess more power to you if you go out there and handle that mountain lion. But out there in California, that's a real thing, right? Yeah, so that's tough stuff. Be careful, Tennille. That's all I can tell you. Be careful. Wayne Kirkland, yeah, I mean, we're always monitoring the situation there, and I guess there's, I know that Greg Byrne, the Alabama athletic director, was asked about the status of full stadiums the other day, and, he's, look, I don't want to talk about it, but it's obviously something we are monitoring. We are monitoring for sure. Let's see what else. Christopher Jacobs says, who wants to tangle the mountain lion? That's insane, yeah. Brian Lindsay says that's not a dog mentality. Yeah, I guess you're probably right. You probably need to be more of a dog than that. You're probably right. Kevin Cook says, why are the live feeds not on the DawgNation app? That's actually a great question. It's also a question far above my pay grade, but I will ask about that. Randy Jackson says, can Kirby make the decisions when it counts? And I certainly understand where that comes from. I mean, you can point to some possible errors that Smart may have made over the course of time. I do believe, though, that most championship decisions, most ways in which a coach influences his team's ability to win a championship, I do truly believe that most of that is not on game day, right? That most of that is what you do ahead of game day, the week before the game, the year before the game, whatever else, that you create situations and systems where there's not as much day-to-day button pushing that goes on. Offensive play calling may be slightly different than that, but for the most part, I think we have a tendency to overrate in-the-moment decision-making, and we have a tendency to underrate the preparation that goes into a game. But I won't deny there have been some individual decisions that are probably worthy of criticism. That's probably true. Xavier Brown says, first of all, thank you for the kind words, Xavier, but he also asks if Kirby's going to fully hand over the keys to Coach Monken and let him run the offense. Yeah, I have every reason to believe that's probably the case. I mean, I think that you, first of all, see Monken not only being a pretty accomplished offensive mind, but also the kind of the guy that has a little bit of a strong personality, right? I mean, one of the things that people say about Monken is, he's demanding. That's a word that you hear used a lot. I think that Monken probably carries a lot of weight behind closed doors. He's the kind of person that potentially has a strong enough personality. I don't know that he's the most charismatic guy in the world, but in terms of strength of personality, he probably has the kind of strong personality that is just maybe more easily able to convince Smart to do certain things than maybe some other coaches might have been in the past, that he's just maybe has the confidence of his conviction, if for nothing else. So I don't really see a lot of evidence as of yet that maybe that Georgia, and Smart in particular, is hesitant to give that control over to Monken. I think that, like last year, the South Carolina game, Georgia ran the ball a lot, didn't throw it a ton, but Georgia also ran for like 10 yards a clip there in that game. There's a very good chance that Monken had total control over the offense of that game and just realized that was the easiest way to get an easy win, that you didn't play around when you were running the ball as well as most teams throw it. And so we may still see Georgia run the ball fairly frequently this year, but there's no evidence that they are running the ball because that's what Kirby Smart wants them to do, or it could just be that's what Todd Monken also wants to do there as well. The point is, long-winded way of answering the question of, I actually feel fairly confident that Todd Monken will get to be what he wants to be as an offensive coordinator. I don't think he would have stuck around for year 2 if he didn't think that was the case. Let me go to YouTube and I'll come back to Facebook. Sergeant AR-10 talking about the lack of NFL success for Clemson quarterbacks. I mean, I think Deshaun's been a pretty good NFL quarterback thus far. James K says, what day does practice start? I think Thursday, I think that's the first day. But it's basically around that time, I believe. Jordan Bowman, the subject of the 2014 team, the last one to I guess play Clemson, get that win there. Scott Pete says, when it goes back to individual coaching decisions, calls that work are dubbed great and calls that fail are blamed on the coach, no matter it was the players that blew the call. Yeah, maybe that's the case. I mean, I'm a lot more comfortable blaming coaches than players. I've always felt that way. My thing in the past has been kind of pre-name, image, likeness, is the coaches are getting paid millions of dollars. The players are simply on scholarship. So if something goes wrong, I personally am always a lot more willing to blame coaches than I am players, because they're the ones that are truly supposed to be professionals here. And, name, image, likeness doesn't change all that much for me. That it's still the coach's job to get the most out of the players. I think, players not doing what they're coached to do is usually, in my mind, the least likely reason that a game fails, the least likely reason that a game plan doesn't work. I just am a lot more comfortable blaming coaches when things go wrong. But your larger point is that in the moment, it's kind of hard to know if a play is going to work or not, right? Or a decision. Sometimes it's not just a play call, it's just a decision, if that's going to work or not, because a lot of this kind of stuff is 50-50. And to further the point you're bringing up, one of the things I'm a little bit of I kind of nitpick in my mind a little bit is people have a tendency to talk about bad clock management, but people don't ever talk about good clock management. I think for the most part, good clock management doesn't really exist. We notice bad clock management, time ticking off the clock and things like that. Could have called timeout sooner. That seems like a huge coaching error. But the truth is, if you stand on the sideline for games, I've been fortunate enough to do that a few times, there is so much going on. I'm not excusing the job of the coaches, but this notion that anyone is processing like 15 things simultaneously, worried about, because a lot of what's going on a sideline during a particular play, during a game, are coaches getting folks ready for what could happen next. If it's 3rd and 8 for the offense, there's all this energy on the sideline about getting the defense ready to run on the field, getting the punt team ready to run on the field. Coaches are typically thinking one play ahead. And so, some of the clock management stuff that happens during a game is simply a function of everything happening there at once. It's one of the reasons why, I think that coaches would do better to automate their decision-making a lot more. In other words, like and this is easier said than done because it's not my reputation on the line, but one of the ways in which a coach could automate his decision-making is, hey, if I've got the better team, Georgia typically does, what's the most aggressive decision I can make in almost any instance? And that eliminates the need to ponder what you should do. We're a good team. We've got the most talent. We're going to press the issue. We're going to do something aggressive. We're going to go for it on 4th down. We're going to go for 2. At any point in time, there's any consideration of doing that. We're not going to punt. We're just going to press the issue. We're not going to kick field goals. We're going to go for touchdowns. And sometimes that's going to succeed. Sometimes that's going to not. But it frees up your mind to think about other things during a game because you're automated to take the more aggressive chance. As I said before, it's easy to say that when you're not the one whose reputation is on the line and that kind of stuff doesn't go wrong, but that is one way that I think coaches could make better decisions just to have most of the decisions already figured out before the game even begins. Danny Blackman says Monken and Lanning are making the decisions this year. Yeah, I mean, I think Georgia's in great shape with both of its coordinators for sure. Triple Diesel also talking about Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton. Very good lineage of quarterbacks on the way, it would seem, for Georgia. Let's see what else. Stephen Wainwright says, which recruit are you hoping UGA can get? You can only pick one. So if I could have any recruit on the open market right now, I would take Luther Burden. If you say, well, you got to have somebody a little bit more realistic than that, because as of right now, I think that Burden is still somewhat unrealistic, then my next name that would be slightly more realistic might be Walter Nolan. That would be kind of where I'd go on that. My choice of anybody right now would be Burden. My choice of slightly more realistic options would probably be Walter Nolan. And that's not to say that I think that Nolan is a better player than Shaw is. I just think that Nolan may be slightly more realistic than Shaw. Let's see what else. So Jay Shipes checks in to say SEC keeps Vandy because they are private school. Therefore, SEC can keep all their teams private in regards to information. It has to So Jay Shipes talking about Vanderbilt. Yeah, Vanderbilt's, value to the SEC is simply the fact they're kind of a fancy pants private school, big academics, elite academic credentials. All these conferences kind of like having some of that around, and the SEC's version of that is Vanderbilt. That doesn't mean a lick to me. That doesn't cause me to think one thing about Vanderbilt for the positive, but the SEC, I think, kind of likes having that around. Johnny Lester says, Florida with only 8 returning starters and only 3 SEC home games. Do you think there's any way they get that 6th win to become bowl eligible this year? LOL. Yeah, Johnny, I wish what you were saying is true. The honest fact, though, is I think that Florida's probably better than some people give them credit for. Not a true threat to Georgia necessarily, but, maybe not as bad as like unranked. That's been kind of kicked around. Phil Steele had that. I have a hard time seeing Florida less than a top 25 team. HR Picking Stuff says, who's the worst clock manager in the SEC? Yeah, I'm not quite so sure about that. A couple of more. We'll see who says what here. Oh, yeah, Jay Shipe says the Vandy thing was in response to me on the cool down talking about kicking out Vanderbilt. Yeah, I mean, some people would certainly like to do that. And at some point in time, I could see that some of these conferences, at a certain point in time, you've expanded all you can expand. As we said before, if we assume that a decade from now, however long from now, there'll be more conference expansion taking place, there are only a few teams that you could actually poach that bring any value to your league. At a certain point in time, it just seems natural that some of these conferences will start looking at teams who are in the league that actually don't pay for their plate. And, a school like Vanderbilt, I don't believe will ever have much to worry about on that because they are, fancy pants academic. There are other schools in the SEC that might be a greater target for that. And I'll just leave it at that. Wally Smith says he still wants Bear Alexander. That's certainly a great name. That's a great name. Johnny also wonders which game week Gator Nation will begin turning on Dan Mullen. Let's see what happens, Johnny, if they lose in uncompetitive fashion to Florida. To Alabama. That's very early in the year. And it'd be interesting to see what kind of mood Gators fans are in after that game against Alabama. Because while I think that Florida's maybe better than some people think they are, I'd have a hard time seeing them be very competitive with the Crimson Tide. 1 or 2 more and we're gone. Bruce Eklund says that Vanderbilt's beaten Tennessee enough to earn some appreciation. Yeah, they have certainly done that. Christopher Jacobs says the Nats here in Georgia are relentless with their attack. I'm assuming he means the actual Nats, not the, sometimes people call the Yellow Jackets the Nats. I'm assuming he means the actual Nats. And if you get down there below that Nat line, man, they are all over your face. They're all over your face. There's no doubt in that. John Paul Williams said Kirby said after the Mississippi State game, we want to be the hunted, not the hunted. He says, I think we've lost that mindset at times. We need to keep that mindset. I think that's, probably true. I know a lot of Georgia fans feel that way. Hugh Nash, we will pray for your wife. Thanks for the update on that. Please let us know how it turns out. But to Megan, we certainly wish you the best, and we will be sincerely praying for you as you go through all of this. Best wishes there on that. Tino Calvino on the subject of Vanderbilt keeping things private. Yeah, that's a benefit they have for sure. It also gives them a chance. Am I right about this? That they can do things to pay for their baseball players in a way that other schools can't. I actually don't know if that's true. I probably shouldn't have said that out loud, but it seems like I've heard that before, that they have a little bit of financial freedom with how they fund their baseball team in a way that maybe some other teams don't have the advantage of. But like I said, I shouldn't have said that because I don't know if that's true. Jason Glossier says quarterback's job is to watch the clock, and also the coach's job is to watch the clock. And that is true. But if my kid is in the back seat trying to ask me something at the same time I'm trying to change lanes, just even thinking about those two things at one time is a little bit hard to do. So I just think that, coaches are real people like anything else, that anytime you're asking them to process multiple, pieces of information at the same time, and they're not, computers, they're not going to do that particularly effectively. So I get where you're coming from. To a degree, it is their job, but I think sometimes we assume that certain aspects of the job are easier than you might think. And it's also kind of interesting, like the coach's box at UGA is right next to the press box, and for the most part, it's so adjacent to it you can't really see it. But every now and then, I will see into the coach's box, and there's just a lot going on. I mean, that's one of those things. They show it on TV, but you almost wish they would show it more. All of the deliberation that's going on in the coach's box and on the sidelines with every single play. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we love football so much. There's just so much to the game. It is really fascinating just how much manpower goes into the actual results you see on the field. All kinds of committee meetings and sidebars about everything. And listen, as I said before, I'm not trying to take the responsibility away from the coaches to get the job done, but there is a lot to process happening there on that sideline. I just think it's important to keep a real perspective of that. Jason Bryan Lee says, any word on Keira Jackson's injury? Mike talked about that a little bit earlier. That's obviously something we'll look to get more of. But my assumption is that Keira is going to be fine. I'm not expecting that to be bad news for certainly September 4th against Clemson. What it means for the very first day of practice, I guess we'll wait and let Kirby Smart say more about that at some point in time over the course of the next few days. But on my list of injury concerns, as of now, Keira is not particularly high on that list. I hope I don't have to change my opinion on that for any reason, but as of now, that's kind of where things stand on that. All right, we're going to get ready to go for right now. Thank you for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews podcast cool down. Y'all make sure you check out R.S. Andrews for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Always a great thing to see what they have going on, and always a way to get that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Get those plumbing, electrical issues taken care of. R.S. Andrews really good at doing that for you. Just all kinds of great stuff. Great way to do that. Also, make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at ajc.com. Update as the Olympics roll on here. And you got the men's basketball team rolling into the semifinals and all kinds of cool stuff going on in Tokyo for the Olympic Games. Of course, continue to look back on 25 years ago with the Olympics in Atlanta. That's really good stuff there as well. Also, a pretty good column from Steve Hummer on what happens for Trae Young now that he's had a great run in the NBA playoffs, got a brand new contract extension from the Hawks. Ronald Acuna's injured right now, and Julio Jones is gone. Is there a chance that Trae Young is about to step up as the face of Atlanta sports? Pretty good stuff from Steve Hummer on that. I hope that you will check that out. Really good stuff. Also, horrible thing, like you've seen the Piedmont Park, deal. Terrible crime story involving that. The mayor yesterday did have some interesting things to say about what, unfounded rumors and things along those lines. That's an important story to follow. It's kind of a, downer, so we don't talk about it on this show. But honestly, these are important things to stay up to date with. So the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at ajc.com can give you a lot more on that there as well. Fascinating, horrible stuff, but certainly something important to stay up to date on. So please check that out, ajc.com as well. Thanks for being here for DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. Hope you have a great day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow at 10 a.m.